And Jodi Dean is a professor in the political science department at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in New York State. She has been active in the We Are Seneca Lake anti-gas struggle and is the author of Democracy and Other Neoliberal Fantasies, Bloc Theory, and The Communist Horizon, among many others.
So, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks so much to Greg and Leo for inviting and hosting me. Is that sound okay? Yeah. So I want to give a kind of a preface at the beginning. I have never been an environmentalist or involved in kind of eco-politics or green issues. I don't like camping. I'm sort of not very good with nature. It's also always seemed to me to be very white and bourgeois. And my own theoretical and political interests have been around class and equality, communism, new media, critiques of democracy. So it was very surprising for me over the last year when I became involved in a local struggle against a Texas-based company called Crestwood Midstream that wants to expand gas storage on Seneca Lake. And so I've got very involved with this. I'm not an organizer for it. I'm just a participant, but I've now been arrested 5 times, and it's given me a lot of stuff to reflect on. So what I want to do is use some of the things that I've learned from involvement with We Are Seneca Lake to talk about climate change and socialist and communist politics. And I also want to put these experiences in conversation with Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything. And as Greg's already mentioned, this is Seneca Lake, by the way. I'm a little scattered, so I'll go back and forth to mention stuff in the slides. As Greg already mentioned, one of Klein's basic ideas in This Changes Everything is that we cannot deal with the climate change from within our economic paradigm. Right? That's impossible. Capitalism and the survival of the planet. Oh, this is Seneca Lake. You can see where Lake Ontario is and the Finger Lakes. That little one, Watkins Glen, down here at the bottom, that's where most of the protests have been taking place around We Are Seneca Lake. But anyway, as you know, for Klein, free market fundamentalism or neoliberalism and unfettered corporate power are absolutely threatening to our capacity to respond to the changing climate. So she wants to make climate change the center of progressive politics. In fact, she thinks it's a huge opportunity for the left and uses the inspiring term people's shock. I want to just read one quote from Klein to let her speak for herself. She says that climate change could be the best argument progressives have ever had to demand the rebuilding and reviving of local economies, to reclaim our democracies from corrosive corporate influence, to block harmful new free trade deals and rewrite old ones, to invest in starving public infrastructure like mass transit and affordable housing, to take back ownership of essential services like energy and water, to remake our sick agricultural system into something much healthier, to open borders to migrants whose displacement is linked to climate impacts, to finally respect indigenous land rights, all of which would help to end the grotesque levels of inequality within our nations and between them. So she thinks this is a tremendously exciting opportunity. Now, before we go on to think about this opportunity, I do want to make one contrast, which is Joe Biden. He's Vice President of the United States, and last week he gave a speech urging more private investment in low-carbon energy technologies because he says the exact opposite of Klein. He says that the climate situation is so bad that we can't trust the state or governments to do anything about it, that it's too big to be left in the hands of the state, and that the only system/institution with the capacity to deal with climate change is the market. So a couple of quotes from Biden here. Only with the private sector can we fully or even mostly realize the opportunities of this energy transformation. Government can't do this. Government can't do this alone. And so again, he's going on and on about clean energy investments provide great financial and social returns, that what we really need is more private sector spending on clean energy, and that the Obama administration's Clean Energy Investment Initiative will encourage people concerned about environment and, of course, those looking for a good financial return. So I bring up Biden here so that we actually get a strong sense of there's a standoff, right? I mean, this is real. I mean, I would call this a standoff that historically has been understood in terms of class struggle, right? A kind of green neoliberalism, which is what we're seeing forced down our throats, and then Klein's green Keynesianism. And so the question then is, okay, if something like green Keynesianism, or better, a green communism or a green socialism is going to be possible, what will make it happen, right? How can we push that forward? Klein emphasizes blockadia. And this is another version, or kind of green version of the alter globalization movement as a movement of movements. And she thinks blockadia is the best way to address climate change. And she associates, or she links into her general description of blockadia, anti-fracking movements, anti-pipeline, anti-extractivist movements. So, and then I think that We Are Seneca Lake as an anti-gas storage movement fits in as a nice example of blockadia. And I'm wondering, what can we learn from We Are Seneca Lake? We like to, those of us who are involved in it, like to talk about it maybe kind of grandly as the uprising in the Finger Lakes. It was covered this, I think just today on National Public Radio, and it's been on the kind of Jumbotron in Times Square. There have been over 300 arrests in this ongoing campaign, this blockade of the Grates of Crestwood. It's a civil disobedience campaign to save Seneca Lake. In a little bit more detail, the idea is Crestwood Midstream, this Texas-based company, wants to expand the storage of methane gas in the fragile salt caverns that are adjacent to the lake. And the lake is the source of drinking water for over 100,000 people. It's the largest of the Finger Lakes. And it also wants to store LPGs, right, propane and butane on the lake. I'm going to say a little bit more about the background of We Are Seneca Lake. They start, the civil disobedience part of the opposition to Crestwood expansion started when FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, granted Crestwood the permission to expand methane storage to an incredible amount of methane storage. I get let's just say billions of gallons. It's way, way beyond local use. What they want to do is to be able to store it for export to the northern part, to New England and the northern part of the United States, but also abroad. So it's an export strategy that Crestwood wants. It's also using fracked gases primarily from the Marcellus and Bakken shale plays, and using the Finger Lakes area as their storage site for them until they can move it onto market. Let's see. So once the legal means of stopping the methane expansion stopped, We Are Seneca Lake decided to undertake civil disobedience, which means blockading the gates of the company. We Are Seneca Lake is really well organized. They've got over 1,000 people have been trained for the civil disobedience actions. There's a mailing list now of over 2,000 people who have registered for training, but have not yet been trained. To go to an action, of course, you have to be trained. Whenever there's an action, the announcement goes out first to who might be interested, and then everything else becomes secret, only to the people who are going to go. There are very specific roles regarding who can do what where you are allowed to stand, where you're going to be during the action. We even bring our own portable toilets because we don't want to be photographed urinating on property, because that's going to change the level of our, basically what we're arrested for. So exactly where we stand, exactly who's standing where, has all been really carefully thought through so that we get a very specific kind of arrests. So, and with this very well organized civil disobedience campaign, there's been, I think it's like 280 something arrests since the end of October, but a number of us have doubled up, right? Like for me, 5, other people, 3 or 4. And so, not that I'm bragging about the most, but because really everyone counts. Yeah. So, in fact, at one point, we created this massive logjam in the local court system. That's not surprising. This is Schuyler County, where the Crestwood facility is located. It only has 23,000 people. The town of Reading has about 2,000 people. And so we are taking, when 40 of us have been arrested, the court proceedings are taking 5, 6, 7, 8 hours just for arraignments. So after a great deal of legal complication, the local judge agreed to dismiss our cases in the interest of justice. Well, this was tremendously exciting, right? It wasn't an ACD, it wasn't, we didn't have to agree not to protest anymore. It was dismissed in the interest of justice. But then that only happened for about 80 people who just happened to be in court that day. And then a bunch of folks were arrested again on Earth Day. And so they've thrown out our dismissals, and the whole legal operation is now back in play. And so we're at the level of multiple kinds of objections and rulings and very complicated legal things. One of the things that you can tell from the pictures is that it was very cold this winter, that we were doing a lot of protests in deep snow and below 0 temperatures. As the winter went on, we had a number of theme blockades to try to keep people's spirits up. From, you saw the arrest of Santa and the elves at Christmas, the New Year's festival, we had a bounty of the Finger Lakes feast. There have been healthcare workers, moms, all sorts of different thematics that have been trying to show the branch, the array of involvement in the issue. So I'm going to keep coming back to some of the details, but I think this is enough to give you a general picture, and I'd be happy to say more in a little bit. But what I want to do now with that background is to try to identify actually 4 specific lessons from We Are Seneca Lake that I think speak to some of the themes that Naomi Klein introduces. And one of these is don't romanticize the local. Right? Don't romanticize, this is now, I guess, a little bit of my criticism of Naomi Klein from participating in this. Don't romanticize the local, which means don't romanticize community, democracy, or the freaking grassroots. We Are Seneca Lake has worked to build a coalition around the lake. And the coalition has included your typical hippie environmentalists, mostly from Ithaca, wineries and wine owners, educators, organic farmers, the tourist sector, healthcare providers, faith leaders. A lot of the language for organizing these actions involves mothers and water and how mothers have amniotic fluid, which makes them connected to water. It's involved love of nature, conserving our way of life. It's also involved a lot of, on both sides, deployment of who's an outsider. So we Are Seneca Lake will often say Texas-based Crestwood, right? To say, oh, they're the foreigners coming in. Schuyler County says Ithaca hippies, right? To say that Ithaca hippies are the ones, even though they're adjacent to the lake. We live in Geneva. This protest the sign there is from a big action that we held in January, where we had 300 people come out for a march in Geneva, which is on the north part of the lake, to say, look, we are Seneca Lake too. We are on this lake. This is our water supply too. We are just involved as you guys down in the town of Reading. And this language of We Are Seneca Lake too worked really well for organizing in Geneva, but it was also playing into who are we, foreigner versus accepted, who counts as one of us. So there's a real division within the community and within the local that in fact the language of sort of celebrating the local and the community doesn't let us get to. Right? In fact, what we need, and so what I think that we need to do is emphasize the language of front lines. It's not about, oh, this community and bad guys coming in. It's like, In fact, fracking shouldn't happen anywhere. The storage of fracked gas should not happen anywhere. It's not us versus outsiders. It's in fact it's in fact everyone who is concerned about climate change. And I think Frontlines helps better than worrying about who's in the community and who's now not in the community. I also want to say on the democracy side, right, democracy has been a vehicle for struggle and a problem for the struggle. The reason I say it's a problem for the struggle is this company, Crestwood, was invited to come to this poor-ass town, or poor-ass county of Schuyler County, asked to come in and invest. Right? It was done by democratically elected officials wanted them to come here. It's a minority of people who are against it. Okay, 15 minutes, I'm going to have to speed up. So we're in the elected, the people who invited Crestwood were elected. We're now trying, we as in We Are Seneca Lake are trying to run candidates to get them out of office. But it's not that somehow there's like a democratic part that's been oppressed. The cut goes all the way through. Democracy is this way that the struggle is manifesting itself. Okay, it's not one democracy versus, it's not democracy versus the evil corporation. It's a battle over the community. All right, so also if we emphasize the language of Frontlines, you get rid of the kind of NIMBY, not in our backyard problem. You also get to link your struggle a lot better, which we're also, some of us in We Are Seneca Lake are trying to do, connecting with the bomb trains, oil trains, which also connects with y'all's struggle against the tar sands. It also makes, if you say front lines, and it makes pipelines, gas storage, oil trains, all one thing, not our community trying to save our land and save our way of life. Okay, so that's the don't celebrate grassroots. I also want to emphasize complexity, and I think that that's one of the issues, one of the realities of complicated struggle, particularly around climate issues, that gets lost completely with a celebration of local grassroots struggles. As I mentioned, We Are Seneca Lake is a database now of about 2,000 people, over 200 arrests. This is a big deal in an area that's spread over, roughly 10 counties. It's hugely rural, right? This is not a city where you can get this many people gathered together. And it takes an incredible amount of expertise and knowledge. So I'm just going to read a rough list of the kinds of expertise and knowledge that has been necessary for this struggle against Crestwood to come into play. And it's not, this long list I'm going to bring up is not to diminish the efforts. It's actually meant to augment and to see how much goes into it and why big structures are actually crucial. Okay, so some of the knowledges and skills important for the battle for Seneca Lake. You need to know about shale formation, salt caverns, comparative data on salt cavern stability and use of gas storage over time. The ecosystem of Seneca Lake, which includes the relation of the lake to farms and industry, as well as the whole array of lake uses, which can be recreational, water supply, waste sites, and energy. You need knowledge of salt mining. There's been salt mining on Seneca Lake for over 100 years. You need information about the geology of the area, data on salinity over time. You need knowledge of gas and oil production, processing, transport, and storage, which includes knowledge of leaks. How often does salt cavern storage leak? What are the percentage likelihood of explosions from salt storage? It's actually very high. What are the effects of workers? What about methane emissions and impacts? The health effects associated with gas and oil production, processing, transport, and storage. Knowledge of truck traffic, rail traffic, pipelines, safety concerns that include comparative volume over time. Now, legal knowledge, right? All that was the kind of technical, sciencey knowledge. Legal knowledge, that this has already come into play for our group in a 6-month or 8-month campaign. Laws for trespass, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, fire code at the county courthouse, so that we know how many people are allowed in the courthouse. Court procedures, what you can ask for, what to expect in terms of penalties and adjournments, Who's allowed to appeal? Conventions and practices at jails in 4 counties, right? Inmates in some of them have to get a TB test and remain separate from the general population for 4 days until they're cleared. In other ones, you're allowed to bring books, and other ones you can only get books if they're sent by Amazon. We have to know the structure of the New York State court system, appeal system, laws for regulating commercial business, because a ban is different from a regulation, laws for emergency management and preparedness, environmental protection regulations, the policy apparatus, as it's divided between federal and state agencies. For us, this has been a huge, big deal, because we've got methane, which is regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and then liquid natural gas, which is regulated by the Department of Environmental Conservation, which is a state-level structure. Okay, there's even more that you can do with regulatory knowledge that's important. Also, local political knowledge. Who was on the Schuyler County Board of Legislators that invited Crestwood into the town? What is the relation between the different judges and Crestwood? In fact, one of the judges had to dismiss himself for conflict of interest because he was an employee of Crestwood. What is the relationship of the Republican Congressman Tom Reed to Crestwood? In fact, he was a local attorney that helped negotiate the deal, which in fact brought the company in and gave it a tax break. So then you also have to have knowledge of the local activist environment, who's worked on what campaigns, who's worked well with each other, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you get the idea. My point is that this kind of knowledge and expertise means that local grassroots campaigns immediately come up against their own problems of capacity, right? The demands of a specific campaign are really a lot, and they make grassroots like a grassroots group can be really great at having a nice visual action that makes people feel happy and involved. But then as the campaign goes on, you start to come up against your inability to scale, right? And it's a matter of expertise, money, and time. Another way to put this, Klein's romantic version of Blockadia underplays and overlooks complexity in fighting climate battles. All right. You know, this loss, over the last 30 years, I'd say there's been a loss of political capacity. On the one hand, in New York, we've seen a very smart anti-fracking campaign. It's been so inspiring and great to get the state to agree to ban fracking. And that happened with a lot of, that's where it was. In part this happened with local level bans that put pressure points on the governor that helped then to create the momentum for the statewide ban. The interesting problem with Crestwood and our local battle is that it's a private company, and so targeting the political system operates differently. On the one hand, we have to target the federal level. On the other hand, we have to target the state agency. And at the other hand, we're targeting a private company and a local county and town justice system. So we can't expect the company just to change on its own. But it's really hard to see how the actions that we take that mess up the county, like how is it that our civil disobedience that affects the county is exerting the kind of pressure that we want on the state and, as in the governor, and on Crestwood. So there's this weird disconnect then between tactics and goal. That said, it's clear that the tactics have built a strong base. They have generated a lot of hope. They've radicalized people. In the march in Geneva that Paul, who's here, and another person and I organized this past winter, there were over 300 people came out, and it was about 30 degrees. And the local newspaper said, 300 activists. Most of these people had never been to a march before. Right? They felt excited and open, and that they are part of this larger momentum, this larger battle in the Finger Lakes. There's been a large letter writing campaign, a massive amount of community support, so that I think it's now 29 local governments at the county, town, and city level have passed resolutions against Crestwood. But all the political mobilization, as inspiring as it is, does not directly affect the company. And so again, we get this dilemma of tactics and hope versus political outcome or political capacity that I think that Klein underestimates. Okay, so the last part I want to say is that, I'll get to my little thing, no war, but class war. I'm concerned, and this might be a little hyper-moralistic on my own part, I don't know, it's hard to say, but I'm concerned about being engaged in an alliance with vineyard owners and people protecting summer homes, folks who are worried about an economy based on tourism. And I think a number of people, and I know for a fact, a number of the other people involved in We Are Seneca Lake are. It's difficult to create this coalition. Many of us are very mindful of the workers at Crestwood because, in fact, Crestwood purchased U.S. Salt, which is a salt mining operation there. And the worries that these folks would lose their jobs, actually that wouldn't happen. Crestwood would just sell the facility and the workers would continue with the salt plant. Their expansion is only going to, by their own numbers, will only create 12 new jobs. And the numbers of jobs that it would destroy in the region are very high. So, but anyway, many of us are very concerned about the salt point workers, and we don't want to alienate them. They don't support what they're doing, but they're not actively opposed on it. Crestwood works very hard to try to play the workers' threat to their job angle against us. At the same time, what we've done in Geneva, and these shots are from the Geneva March, is we've tried to bring up the working class aspect of the struggle, because for us, the city park and the state park are huge sites of local recreation. It's not about private property. Where we are on the lake, it's not, so these are not like people's country homes. This is public, public supported parks where lower income residents and visitors can have vacation for free, enjoy themselves for free. It's almost like a commons. Also, organizing in Geneva was successful on the lines of, when people would ask, well, why is this Texas company putting things down in Schuyler County? It's like, they got the answer. It's because they're poor. Schuyler County can't fight back, right? It's a sacrifice zone. So that's one of the terms that Klein introduces that I think is really useful, and that it should be furthered more than some of these celebrations of locality and democracy, but that we need to emphasize ever more this tension between sacrifice zones and commons, and that we need to, if we push that kind of line, we are more likely to be able to resist some of the privatizing maneuvers that happen within grassroots action. So one last thing I want to say about this, I started getting a little frustrated with We Are Seneca Lake this past spring when Josh Fox, who is the guy who made the Gaslands movie, kind of teamed up with us, and he got arrested, of course, because everybody wants to get arrested with We Are Seneca Lake, but he's shilling for a solar energy company that wants private solutions, right? It's a privately held company that wants investors, and it wants individual purchasing of solar panels. Well, already in Ithaca, there are a number of long-term collectives, right? Large-scale 150-family collectives that have been pursuing their collective energy grids. And yet that got totally pushed aside in favor of these Josh Fox market solutions on his Grassroots Solutions tour. So I worry very much about the way that a kind of grassroots emphasis actually feeds into green neoliberalism and feeds into private solutions over collective solutions. Okay, I'll stop there. I'm worried about time, and then we can come back to more of this later. Thanks.